Hello and welcome to Realm's Edge Gaming. In this episode we're going to take a look at 10 things that I would like to see in the next Gloomspite Gitz Battletome. If you've not already subscribed to the channel, if you could do so, that would be great. And if you could drop a like and a comment below, that would be brilliant as well. I'd love to be able to talk to you about what you'd like to see in the next Battletome. Or if you'd like me to do 10 things I'd like to see for another faction, if you drop that in the comments below and I'll see what I can get up to for you. So, this idea came partly about through a channel called Cinderfall Gaming, who's done something similar, so definitely well worth checking out if you've not had a look at their channel. And for mine, I'm going to be focusing on the models and the Battletome lore. And I think, maybe in the future we will see a Gloomspite Gitz Battletome. It gives me kind of some, reasoning to believe that it could happen because Broken Realms narrative is definitely kind of being very pacey with the updates to different factions. Also, Daughters of Cain and Hedonites of Slaanesh also got Battletomes at a very similar time to Gloomspite Gitz, and as you know, have just had recent ones brought out as well. I won't even mention about Lumineth Realm Lords. That's definitely a discussion for another video, but theirs looks amazing as well. So I'm really going to be careful that what I'd say about the 10 things I'd like to see don't kind of focus on the weakness of an army. So for example, one of the weaknesses of Gloomspite Gitz is shooting, so my 10 things that I'd like to see aren't just going to focus on shooting to make them massively overpowered or anything like that. The first thing I'd like to see is more named characters. So I know we've got Troggoth the Loon King, and that's absolutely fantastic, and we've got some mention of Mollog from the Warhammer Underworlds. And then when we've got the different battalions like the Jaws of Mork and some of the other ones, we've got the Trog Herd, and I think they did one for the Scuttletide as well. They have mentioned some kind of characters' names, but never really gone into too much detail about them. Now, I used to play Warhammer back in the world that was, Warhammer Fantasy, and in the kind of codexes, the Battletomes, you had characters like Wurzag, Grimgor, Ironhide, Skarsnik. And I used to love that. I thought it was great to have so many named characters because it really made the kind of armies and the battles really thematic, and it added a certain richness to the lore as well. So I would love to see them delve a little bit deeper into some named characters. My second point is something to do with the kind of mushrooms. Now, in the Battletome, it really goes into detail. The Battletome's gorgeous. It's really well illustrated. And they mention loads of different types of fungus and mushrooms, and I wish we could kind of represent that on the tabletop. So there is an endless spell called Mork's Mighty Mushroom, but I just thought it'd be really cool if we had like spore models, almost like the Tyrannid ones, the spore mines, and they could represent different mushrooms. Maybe they could kind of come from Mork's Mighty Mushroom, and you could kind of move them around the table. There could be different strains of funguses that had like different effects. So for example, in the Battletome they mention Mork's glowy eyes, and they're these kind of bioluminescent mushrooms that glow. Perhaps that could have the effect of having, +1 to hit to an enemy unit when you're aiming at them. Something along those lines as you kind of light them up. I guess to some extent like the Tau, is it the Pathfinder drones? But anyway, I thought that'd be kind of a cool mechanic. I don't know whether you'd be able to have it like with some randomness to kind of show them drifting. I know in the past, in the world that was, there was like directional dice, or maybe you could kind of, as the player, control them, or maybe even take it in turns, almost like the endless spells and how they are. But I thought that might be kind of interesting and definitely in keeping with the faction. Now, onto a little bit of lore that I'd like to see expanded upon, and that is how the Everdank is accomplished. So we know that the world is, or the universe in Age of Sigmar is absolutely massive. And one thing that the book doesn't really do amazingly well is actually explain how the Everdank is accomplished. Because we know that the realms are kind of, split up with the realm gates. And the Everdank is accomplished by the bad moon kind of staying in one place and illuminating it. But I don't quite understand how that light's going to be in every single realm, like Shaman, Akshi, Ulgu, Hish. like, is the luminosity going to intensify? Will the moon get bigger? I just kind of would like the lore writers to explain it a bit more, how it is actually accomplished. Even, if that actually is possible, maybe it's the Gloomspite Gitz thinking that, this will happen, but, it's not possible, but it keeps them trying to gain the favour of the bad moon, even though it will only ever kind of just be chaotic and kind of crash into other celestial bodies in the sky. And this kind of leads me on to the next mechanic in the game, and that is the bad moon. So I kind of would really like to see a bad moon kind of token or something. I think there was one when they brought out the Battletome, but unfortunately I didn't get one. But really it's to do with the actual control over the moon in the game, because in keeping with the lore, I suppose, with Troggoth, it is kind of erratic. And I was kind of thinking maybe they could do something similar to the Tides of Death mechanic for Ideneth Deepkin, where at least then we would know what in-game effects were going to happen with each kind of gaming turn that takes place. Because I think one of the difficulties as a Gloomspite Gitz player it is in keeping, with the kind of erraticness and what will happen next, is kind of planning how to do your next turn. And it would be cool if the bad moon had the kind of phases of the moon, like new, waxing, full and waning, so you knew what gaming effects were going to happen in each kind of turn that was taking place. And I suppose you could kind of keep it random to some extent, like with Troggoth, maybe being able to alter the turns or the phases of the moon, so you might have waxing, new, waning and then full. Or you could maybe get the moon to stay for 2 turns on one of those, but they would have different effects. I think that might be a kind of cool mechanic to explore in a little bit more depth and help make Gloomspite Gitz a bit more competitive. You might have seen recently in kind of tournament lists, they aren't doing particularly well. The next thing I'd like to see is the Loon Shrine. At the moment, it's kind of restrictive as to where we can place it as players. I think it's within 12 inches of deployment, whereas, you're thinking about the Bone Tide Nexus, I'm thinking about the Gloomtide Shipwreck. You've got a lot more flexibility as to where you can place them. And the actual rules themselves is about once your unit is wiped out. So for example, 60 stabbers all have to be destroyed before you can bring back 30. It's actually quite difficult to have happen. And then normally when it does, it's a bit late in the game for it to actually have too much of an effect. It's also limited with the sense that it only buffs kind of Moon Clan Grots. I know that if you're running a Jaws of Mork army, it changes it to Squig units, but I would like to see kind of more powerful effects in game that, have a bit more flexibility for the Gloomspite player. Next, I would like to see some more sub-factions or lurk lairs with lists and abilities. I know Games Workshop have kind of addressed this to some extent with the White Dwarf issues. We've got the Squigglelunch, the Jaws of Mork. I think we had a Spider Fang and a Troggoth battalion. But in the Battletome, it mentions lurk lairs or tribes such as the Bad Snatchers, Claggett Smotherers, Frazzle Shun Stalk tribes, and Glintfang. I would really like to see some kind of actual Moon Clan grot kind of battalions that focus on, more so them. I'm going to come to Synergies in a bit later, but it kind of leans into that. Okay, so next, I would like to see some kind of lore reflected in the game, and that's with Deep Strike tunneling rules or a lurk lair mechanic. So the Gloomspite Gitz are kind of a subterranean faction. They come from underground, and there's nothing really in the rules to reflect that apart from the Loon Shrine, I guess. But it would be cool if you could have at the start of the game the enemy rolling a d6 for each unit. On a roll of 1, the kind of ground collapses so that they maybe had suffer a wound or a half movement due to unstable ground. To kind of reflect the way that the grots have tunnelled underground and weakened it, or even have some units that could kind of deep strike, I was thinking about Segmapedes. You could have like a Segmapede unit where the Segmapedes have tunneled underground and the Gloomspite Gitz have come with them. And then you could kind of pop up in a different part of the on the board. You could make it random as well, maybe to represent the Grots getting a little bit lost on the way, with them, what turn will they appear on, but something that would be definitely in keeping with the faction. So you can see here one of the Segmapedes modelled on the Dankhold model there, and it would be quite a cool unit, I think, to see on the tabletop. So this kind of ties in with the synergies. A lot of the battalions don't encourage you to take a mix of, Grots, Troggoths, Squigs, because the kind of synergies between them are kind of only buffing those units. It's quite difficult to kind of get a mixture or, a good balance. And it would be great if they could kind of either introduce rules or, a battalion where it did encourage you to take Squigs, Grots, Troggoths, and, have a real mixture where they would kind of all work in tandem together. Okay, last couple. I would really like to see a kind of big war brought together, and maybe we'll see this with the Broken Realms fiction. In the story The Squint, it talks about Skragrott and Gordrak being in the same army as they march on Excelsis. It would be great if there was a battalion where you could actually field Skragrott and Gordrak together. And in the world that was, as I mentioned, for the Greenskin army, they had an animosity mechanic, as they might kind of start to fight amongst themselves, because the Greenskins like nothing more than to fight. So maybe they could introduce that mechanic again. But it would be really cool to see Skragrott and Gordrak together, and I'm really hoping in the Broken Realms book that comes out eventually that we will see that. Okay, next we've got the Troggoth lore and rules being correct. In the battalion, it says about Skragrott and Scrap of Spill being guarded by a quartet of armour-clad Dankhold Troggoths. However, when you actually see the army list for Skragrott's Conquerors, it lists Skragrott's Evies as 5 Dankhold Troggoths. So it would be good to kind of see that amended so that the lore is reflected in the rules as well. A couple of honourable mentions that I was maybe going to talk about in regards to what I'd like to see for the Gloomspite faction. Loonstone carrying Gitz. Well, Loonstone is actually explosive, so it'll be really cool to see some kind of some Gitz that were carrying blocks of Loonstone that would maybe explode, or maybe a Loonstone lobber or launcher, so similar to the rock lobber. Maybe it could be shaped like the Bad Moon and hurl Loonstone at the enemy, kind of explosive rock. And then the Gitmob Grots being integrated into the faction with the return of the Goblin Doom Diver and some of the other kind of models that they had. I know that the Wolf Riders had, was it Snarlfang's Rippers, had the Gitmob Grots keyword. I don't know whether we will see that, to be honest. I think that the Gloomspite Gitz have become so much their own faction that it will be quite difficult to integrate the two together, unless it was kind of like the thematic thing where we mentioned with Broken Realms, with Skragrott and Gordrak. But you know what? It was something that was kind of an interesting thing to think about at least. So boys and girls, everyone listening, if there's anything that you would like to see for Gloomspite Gitz, it would be great to get your opinion. If you've enjoyed the show, that's great. If you'd like to see another faction explored, please drop a comment below telling me which one you'd like to see next. Thank you for joining me. It's been great fun. I always like joining you with the chat below as well. So hopefully you've enjoyed the show and we'll speak soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.